Okay, so this was actually literally, this is today's current drought map. Okay. And
Wow.
that, if you look, I've over here visually, I've got our legend on top of this. I'm going to move this up here so that y'all can see what these colors mean. Okay, currently, right now, 88% of the state of Texas is abnormally dry or drier. 78% is in moderate drought. 65% of the state is severe drought. 41% of our great state is in extreme drought, and almost 16% of it is in exceptional drought. Now, we've seen this before, and we know that rain can come. We're getting into hurricane season. We never know what's going to happen. That's certainly one thing I have learned, is that it is basically impossible to predict the weather. But here in Cherokee County, we are, come on and give me the next slide. Come on. Okay, so this is us in Cherokee County today in the yellow on the left. We are 100% of Cherokee County abnormally dry right now, which is the first state of drought, right? It is predicted that we're going to move in, our short-term prediction is that we're going to move into, you know, some moderate and some severe drought areas in Cherokee County over the next couple of weeks. And of course, when I looked at the weather today, we've got nothing but brutal temps. And I think our first rain chance is like July 8th. So we've got a couple of tough ones coming up. And just as a side note, you guys are all smart enough to know this already, but I'm going to say it. Please do not burn anything. We are not in an official burn ban, but here in Cherokee County, there's a fire burning right now, right outside of Alto. There's a bad fire in Jacksonville yesterday. And I don't know exactly what caused Jacksonville. They say that today was a grass fire that moved to the barn. What started the grass fire? I don't know. But anyway, so that's just something we really, really, really need to be aware of. So that being said, I really think it's, you know, this is a planning time. That's the whole purpose of this. It's like, okay, what we're going to do going forward and how we're going to think about that. And there are some things that some of y'all may already know, but other things that I'm going to bring up. And the number one thing that we need to take into account when we're thinking about watering over the summer, much less drought preparedness, but watering at all, is what is your source of irrigation going to be? Is it city water? Is it well water? Are you having to pump it from somewhere? Were you trying to grow a garden without any irrigation? And if you're trying to grow any garden without irrigation, congratulations, you can now go into the house, into the air conditioning, because it's all about to burn up into a cinder if you don't irrigate it. There are a few things that might withstand, and peppers might withstand some of that, but by and large, most of our regular warm season crops are going to need some irrigation. Now, some of it, we do it on a timely manner. Like if you're growing peas, if you can get the blooms to come on, they'll dry on the vine. They'll be just fine. You'll have a lower yield, but you'll still have peas that you can then dry. You can let them dry on the pod. We've done that, you know, many a time in the garden. But just some peas. Yeah, but even black-eyed peas or whatever, a purple hulls, the pod just dries, and you know, they dry on the vine. That's what happens when you miss that week. Somebody gets sick or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, we're just going to have those dried already. So now, once you've thought about your irrigation source, okay, you need to then think about some elements of what's going into that source. If you are using city water, your biggest concern for most of us is going to be the chlorine that your plants are about to get. okay? Chlorine is a sort of a major restrictor. And the reason why is because the chlorine competes with the other elements that the plants are supposed to take up. There's an exchange area that's on the roots, and it's like a barrier with, if you can imagine it, like, remember those little shape boxes where the holes match the shapes exactly, and you can't get, you know, the triangle into the circle or the square, you know what I mean? You can sort of generalize it thinking like that. At that barrier, they're electronically set up to receive, you know, I'm really wanting nitrates. And most other things, if it's not a nitrate, you don't get there. No soup for you. However, if it's chlorine, chlorine looks like nitrates. So the plant goes, okay, you'll do. Except that the chlorine stunts the growth completely. Not only does it not get the nitrogen at all, so it's chlorine in and of itself, the plant only needs a tiny bit of. And so it's now being flooded with it. So not only is it going, what do I do with all this chlorine? It also is not getting the nitrate and the phosphate and the sulfate uptake. So that being said, you've got to make a plan to mitigate your chlorine. And there are a couple of ways to do that. And one of them is not water as much. Only make sure you're watering, especially when you need it. And even as master gardeners, we've been gardening a long time. It is hard to resist that urge to water, especially when it's hot outside. But, you know, if you can imagine, like, I'm so thirsty, but that's salt water. So I'm not, you know what I mean? So chlorine. Exactly. It's not going to solve any of the problems. So you balance that level of giving them enough to keep them alive and do what you want them to do versus, you know, you got to find that balance. The other thing you can do is remove the chlorine. There are a couple of ways to do that. You can boil water to remove chlorine, which is good for us as drinking. If we need to drink something right away, we want to, or if you were trying to set up an aquarium or whatever to mitigate the chlorine, you can boil it. That's not really going to help you water your garden. Okay. The other thing that happens is evaporation. Chlorine will evaporate from standing water in about 24 to 48 hours. So if you've got a chlorine problem, you can run the water into an open thing and let it sit for 24 to 48 hours and then water with it. Yes, sir?
So it's sort of like aeration of water, like you do for sulfur. If you were to get sulfur out of water,
exactly.
Aerate it.
Exactly.
But the chlorine, it would dissipate faster if you have a larger surface area exposed.
Yes.
But to stabilize chlorine, they put ammonia in there sometimes. And that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna say,
Oh, well.
I don't know. That's a rabbit hole I'm not prepared to go down right there.
Straight in the ditch.
I'm sorry.
So no, don't be sorry. That's an excellent question. But so in order to form, you know, whatever they use to make that binding happen so that the chlorine does its job, usually is bound up to form the chlorine. But so if there's nitrates in there, the plant, so if there's chlorine and nitrates at the same time, the nitrate level has to far exceed the chlorine level because the plant is going to take up the chlorine. You know what I mean? It's like, who gets there first? And so that's the problem with the chlorine there. So you were talking about there being potentially nitrates in the
Well, the
water.
reason I found that out was dealing with aquariums.
Mhm.
And in order for me to knock the chlorine out, I had to put in something that knocked the ammonia out first and then knock the chlorine out. And that's the reason I
So
said.
that's why we're not talking about putting things in there to deal with the chlorine. We're talking about getting it out.
Well, this was to get the chlorine out, so but you had to get the ammonia out first, so because it was binding.
So if you were to have a 55-gallon drum
Mhm.
and you're trying to check the pH and you find out that it has chlorine in it, you could use the pool tester to adjust the chlorination of the water. See how rapidly it's declining if you don't put more chlorine in it. I'm not talking about
Yeah,
pH,
yeah,
but
yeah.
whatever that scale is that they measure chlorine in.
Mhm.
It would
It's
have
just
to be
its
chlorine.
presence of parts per million in the water,
Like
so it would be a
swimming pool.
chlorine detector.
Okay, but I was just trying to figure out how I would do it, because I'm using a lot of well water from our local rural well water. And the only way that it stays clean and clear and looks like it's filthy is they put a lot of chlorine in it.
I was gonna say, normally it's pretty lucky if you've got well water,
What if
because
it's-
generally they don't have chlorine,
What if
but
you
that's
can't-
hard.
I wonder if it's not, I mean, you can tell there's a little bit in there, but not much. Is that acceptable? or-
Yeah, so I water straight from the water hose to my plants, okay?
Sure.
But I also am not watering a lot every day, right? My plants are like, oh my gosh, if she'd only water us a little more. But, so, yeah, my stuff is just gotta live.
Well, I can't taste I know there's a little chlorine in it, but it's not that much. And then our water
Yeah.
system here at Russ Rural Water System, it's
Yeah.
not that much chlorine, but it is a little bit. in it.
Right, and so you don't have to remove all of the chlorine. So that's the thing, is understanding what's happening with the plant level with the chlorine present. And if a little chlorine, almost all of our water has a little chlorine in it. And as long as you've got some nitrates and other stuff getting in there that is more than the chlorine, it's not an issue.
Like you say,
Okay.
Houston used to be so strong, I mean, you thought she was in the swimming pool or something.
Yeah. So boiling, evaporation, which is generally what's most common for us, we can do it in larger batches. Distillation, much less common. Ain't nobody got time for that. But you can use activated activated carbon in a water filter, which can be done on a larger scale if you were trying to put something together. Like if you had well water that you were working with, you could put together a large scale sort of carbon filtration system to do that. If it was a major issue. So and then of course there's reverse osmosis, in case any of us were just overly flush with money and didn't know what to do with it. Or we're trying to grow blueberries. But I'm just saying, and lots of reverse osmosis is excellent. It's just expensive.
If these are indications of too much chlorine on these leaves, if we're seeing that now, we may have to make a decision whether we want to continue. What's the yield? Are we getting a lot of fruit from it, or we're just trying to get some fruit?
Exactly.
From it? We may
You've
wanna
gotta-
Get that fired up and say, okay,
Exactly.
that
That's
one's
the
over.
whole thing is and that's actually another slide down the line as no, don't be sorry. That's good. It all runs together because that's our choice. You look at your situation. What we're talking about right now is what is your situation with your water? And then and you look at the damage, and that's exactly what's on these slides. You've got chlorine damage and you've got salt damage, and chlorine and salt damage look basically just alike. It also can look like drought damage in general. Basically, the edges of the leaves start to turn yellow and brown, and it can be from salt presence on there. It can be from chlorine, which the plants react to just like salt, or that can be from drought situation. But just understanding what's going on there. But that's what all three of those pictures show. And the other thing that you'll notice with chlorine is stunted growth. Because if you look at what the chlorine restricts, it restricts nitrates and phosphates, right? Sulfur is important, but nitrates and phosphates are, pretty big in the whole growth. That's roots and leaves right there. Boom, boom. And of course, flowers too with the phosphates. But so imagining that. Now, sodium, that's when we're talking about salt levels, although I don't like to necessarily throw around the term salt. Technically, your fertilizer that you're putting on there is a salt. It's not table salt, but chemically, it's a salt. So we're talking about sodium level, and the reason sodium is an issue is because just like chlorine competes with nitrates, sodium competes with potassium and calcium and magnesium, okay, and even ammonium. So all of that the plant is really needing, and instead it's getting sodium, right? Killer, totally brutal. And there are a couple of places here in Cherokee County where that's a major issue. The water in the city of Alto has incredibly high salt issues, and Patty's water test came back with incredibly high sodium, not incredibly high, but high enough to inhibit her plant growth. And so then you have to go, okay, I need to look at how I mitigate that issue. If you have a sodium issue, that's a harder problem to deal with than just the chlorine issue. Chlorine we can deal with evaporation and stuff like that. Sodium takes some serious mitigating issues. I'm sorry, my chat reader isn't here, so I'm so I'm just checking that. But so looking at what to do about that, the first thing is to understand that's a problem. And when you're dealing with sodium levels, if you're working in a raised bed, and even to a great degree with chlorine, but if it's a sodium issue with you, leaching is going to be super necessary. And like we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's sort of the first step you take. And you know how you deal with growing your plants, but also I need to grow salt tolerant, sodium tolerant varieties of things, and grow during a season where I've got rainfall, or set up rainwater harvesting. So
How do you leach?
we will answer that question in no, but we're getting to that in just a minute. Okay, the other thing that you need to consider about your water source is if there's usage restrictions on it. So if it's city water, is there something they don't allow? They don't allow, X, Y, and Z type of watering. They don't allow, whatever. Being aware of any restrictions from your water source is important. It's hard for us to think, at least it is for me, here in East Texas, that they would restrict any kind of water usage until we get to a drought position. But there are some watering areas where they do restrict it. So
over toward Fort Worth.
Oh, yeah.
Big concrete company down by Midlothian.
Mm-hmm.
They're sucking water out of the water table so fast it's affecting the whole state.
Yeah.
And they've used it to make concrete. But it's such a great, all these big concrete trucks that are double, triple, that I don't know how they can do that.
That's one of those things where you go, that's a money issue.
Well, but I'm saying about restrictions. Sometimes there's not enough restrictions.
That's true. That is very true. So
think about, wow, I got this new business in town, but they may have a great water requirement and drive your water prices up.
I know. So definitely an issue. Moving into, so we're looking at what kind of water we have. And now let's talk a little bit about when to put it on. You guys have heard me sort of beat this dead horse pretty regularly, but in case you've forgotten, the best time to water is in the morning. If you have a choice between morning and night and have an option, you should always do it in the morning time, because that's going to let the plant use it most efficiently during the day when it most needs it. It cuts down on the stress. Now, if you have no choice and it's either I water at night or I don't water, it doesn't get in, it may be a long time before it gets water. Obviously, watering at night is a good thing. You would want to make sure that you're not getting water on the leaves. The reason why, so morning is before it's hot enough that you have so much evaporation issue that it interferes with the amount of water that you're putting out. But still close enough to sun being on the leaves to evaporate the water off the leaves so that you don't have disease potential. Okay, how early is too early? If the water is going to be sitting on the leaves for like 6 hours before the sun starts hitting it and evaporating it, that is too much. So if you're watering at 1 a.m., you might as well back it up and water it in the evening because it's going to be the same difference, But so I'm just saying you need to be considerate of that, but you don't want to water in the middle of the day.
Why is it that when dew is on your plants, what's that different from watering?
So it's not, so the dew is important. And that's why even when you don't water at night and your plants really needed it, when you go out the next morning, they look refreshed because there's been some dew and they've gotten some moisture
That
in.
usually develops in the early part of
It
the-
does, but it's not enough to water the plants.
Oh,
Right,
no.
so
But it-
that's,
But it doesn't create the fungus or it doesn't create the.
nah, well, it doesn't come over necessarily usually in the middle of the night, you know what I mean? But the dew point, it is a varying target. And that you can't always account for, but 100% you can adjust when you're watering so that doesn't add to it. Did you?
Yesterday, I watered our garden with a hose that's not in a pot. And today we came early to the class. When we got back, my garden was wilted. And I had no choice. I had water because I was either going to lose it,
Yeah,
but to use the water most effectively, you're saying do it in the morning. But if you had to, you got in the bind, you couldn't.
yeah. And you guys are not watering on the actual plants. You're watering in the containers, right?
90% of this that
Yeah.
way. This was the Three
So-
Sisters. The
Okay.
corn,
Yeah, so just
we use
try,
a water hose.
you use a water hose on that?
No, we're using, yeah.
Oh,
Is that
the
not good?
sprinkler. Only because the water gets on the leaves. So you get some burn on your plants. If you've got chlorine in that, you get some leaf burn from the water hitting the leaves. The most efficient thing to do is to do a soaker hose or to do a drip irrigation system. Drip is like, that is the best, most water saving thing to do. And it directs it exactly on the plant. But if you can't install a drip system, just doing a soaker hose around there is better than a sprinkler.
Right.
Because even in the evening with a sprinkler, you lose water to evaporation because it's in the wind and everything. And in that brutal heat.
Thank you for that.
So-
I'll put more work on my list.
I try, man. I try. I do what I can. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit
This is a
about
shocker.
what, okay, so yeah, let's talk about how much. This is what we need. Now, this is in a whole season, okay? So this is the whole season water requirement for tomatoes is anywhere from 22 to 26 inches. Now, if you think about when we're growing tomatoes, we never get enough water in the end part of our tomato harvest to equal what they need there. So tomatoes are almost always going to require irrigation. And so understanding that, we might get as much as the potatoes need, because of the timing when we're planting them. We certainly don't get as much as the peppers need. Now, what happens to peppers when they get drought stress? Anybody know? They get hot. hot.
Oh.
Yeah, the peppers get hot.
Look at that, watermelons is less than the peppers and tomatoes.
I know, and watermelons have those huge,
Potatoes and-
so they have huge, deep roots, right? So watermelons are extremely thrifty, but it's because of their large, deep root system. And look at corn, terrible amount of rain needed for corn. Carrots don't need much. Cantaloupe, interestingly enough, needs more than watermelons. But so these are just things to consider. Spinach is a great
Look at
crop to
onions.
grow.
Look at onions.
I know, right? But if you think about when we're growing them, that's why they generally grow. We normally have plenty of rainfall for the onions,
So-
normally.
Are you saying that onions, because they're in the spring, grow up in the spring and harvest in the summer, they could be planted in the summer and harvested in the fall?
Well,
But
the
you'd have to
problem,
water
You have to water them a lot.
no, and the problem with that is it would have to be a variety that would not bolt in the heat.
Yeah, that heat
But
bolt-
so you can grow an onion crop in the fall, but you would need to plant it in like October when the heat breaks so that, you know, you don't, so there is a fall planting time for onion bulbs. And also you can plant onion seeds in the fall that you still harvest the next summer. It's the long game for
So
that.
could you, so I make sure I understand it,
Mhm.
define bolt?
Okay, bolt is where it shoots up a flower stalk. So bolting is when the plant is like, whoop, I'm done, it's too hot, and
Give me some seeds,
I'm gonna make seeds right now. My internal clock says, we're done and it's time for Mother Nature's process to happen.
So
Cilantro
that's
makes
what's
a
happening
seed,
with my
that's
carrots.
lettuce, carrot, or that, if they're throwing up
Then they're
a
like,
bloom
so
stalk.
That big around or that big around, that's it's
Yeah.
more the seed.
If your onion does throw up a bloom stalk, you need to go ahead and eat it. It's not gonna get any bigger and it won't store either.
Store will.
So that's one of those things. There are varieties that are less likely to bolt, but there are no varieties that can handle what we've got during the summer pretty much.
So on all of my tomatoes, big tomatoes,
Uh-huh.
there's no more bloom. You gonna talk about that with water?
Well, the blooms are not they don't have anything to do with water, but it wouldn't do any good for your tomatoes to have blooms anyway, because they just fall off. Like I said today in the meeting, it's too hot at night.
Nothing we can do to fix that.
If you had them in a greenhouse that was cooled, where the temperature was adjusted to, but I mean, how much do you like your tomatoes? The best thing that you can do for that is to grow cherry tomatoes, which will continue to produce to some degree. They don't do that big whole, we're just, so you can do cherry tomatoes, or you can do heat set varieties, which will still produce some. It's not that big flush of growth, but you'll still get some stuff put on from that.
Now, you were saying that like my celebrity, which I had a great crop this year, if I can keep it alive into the fall, it'll start producing again.
Absolutely. And so it'll continue blooming to some degree. The plant process is basically shut down when the temperatures get into the 90s. Like the whole plant growth is just like, okay, I need to take a nap. It's hot.
So it's not
But-
really
but-
pollen.
Well, it is pollen, even so the blooms are produced, but they don't make a fruit because the pollen isn't viable. But so the plant doesn't produce even as many blooms because of the heat. It just, the chlorophyll can't even do its job because inside the plant, the processes
There's
aren't
no
happening.
There's no pollination that we can do to bring that fruit on.
It's just like when your tea goes sour, there's no coming back from that. You know what I mean? You can't undo.
I just thought
It's
Yeah.
possibly maybe some hand pollination, but that would be a lot of.
You would have to catch it. You'd have to figure out when the pollen was viable.
Yeah, it's
And
like it's
do it.
burned or something.
But-
It'd be a lot of.
Yeah, it gets real
a lot of
sticky in
work
there.
and me.
Well, and we don't have any time of day anymore where so I don't know, to
Okay,
me,
so the
if
little
you were
cherry
doing it.
tomatoes are just heat
Or
tolerant.
Creoles, there's a subset of tomatoes that produce when it's hot. And so if that would be the thing to do, just like I recommend with peach plantings, to just have varieties for particular, the early girls, if you just can't, well, you just gotta have it out there as soon as, but do an early set, do celebrities, do some Creoles or whatever. Sue's another good one that's
Keep
heat
your
set.
tomato plant alive and go
And to-
buy some at the store, and then
So-
when it gets cool enough, it'll start producing again.
But you can grow new tomato plants. You can pinch your middles when they're big enough and grow new fresh tomato plants
for the farm.
from what you've already got.
Well, I was thinking about taking my pruning shears and prune the big tomato plant where its requirement for nutrition is great and water, trying to get it to the fall where it.
Yeah,
They can
yeah,
produce fruit.
absolutely. That's an excellent idea.
The succulents or the suckers, I guess you say, is easy to propagate.
Yeah. And so that's actually
That's
one
the
of the
one we
recommended
pinch
practices.
off. Is it the one we pinch off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the recommended practices is pruning it back so that you get fresh new growth and it has reduced.
Excellent.
So, okay,
Because it's already got a great root system.
yeah,
And our bodies were designed to eat what's in season, not to eat the same thing all year long.
exactly
I
right.
think it's good to eat
Exactly right.
tomatoes all year.
Okay. All right, so let's get back to what we're talking about here. All right, so it's like, I do not want to be here all night, people. I love y'all so much. Let's get back on track. Okay, okay, great. Now it's a drought. All right. We really didn't get that rainfall on July 10th that we were hoping for. And so now what do? Okay, for sure, watch your water restrictions and just be mindful yourself, because just like John was saying, they're using up water from the water table doing, stuff that we want to be able to have drinking water for people before we're feeding. Yeah, if your garden is feeding your family, then yes, you need to do whatever it takes to make your garden feed your family. But you also may need to change what you're feeding your family. Like obviously, tomatoes are not going to be really well supported in the summer, but leafy greens will still, to some degree grow. You can get them started and they can grow in part sun or, so you can grow spinach and stuff like that has less of a water requirement. Anyway, so watch for water restrictions. Remember that your drinking water comes first. Find ways to use your gray water if it's legal. Yes, ma'am? Yes, sir.
Okay,
Sorry.
she just said, my grandmother used to do this. She would take the water out of the sink and the tub,
Not the tub.
but the tub you could.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
Tub
that's if you
water.
look at the
If you
definition
can
of gray
separate
water.
those out, sometimes in the country you can't.
Yeah, and like, so my mother, instead of having her clothes washer, her washing machine, instead of having that go into our sewer system, it actually goes into her yard. Now, what that means is that she cannot wash with hot water. And she has to be mindful of what detergent she uses. Okay, that's an important part there. But so she constantly, her roses never lack for water. That she can also put that in her flower bed, in her raised bed over there. So that was clever planning for where to use the water. So, we seldom ever wash with hot water anyway. So that's something to think of. But yes, you could, if you had the system right, save that water from the sink and that sort of thing. So gray water is your used water from, that includes the sinks, the shower, the bath, and the laundry, as long as it doesn't have any harsh detergent. If you're washing it with Gojo, you probably don't want to put that on your plants, right? But, my daughter it was in some bathroom and she was like, Mom, what is this weird Gojo stuff? It's called gritty. I'm like, yeah, it's for getting grease off your hands. And so anyway, but so you don't want to water with black water, which is from your sewer system, or if it contains harsh chemicals, right? So you don't want to do any of your toilet water or anything with harsh chemicals. Now, that being said,
or an aerobic system.
some aerobic systems are built with charcoal filters. And so it depends on the system, but also you can put things a distance enough away that it is filtered through the soil to get to that. But yes, you would never want to put water directly from your aerobic system onto a garden without knowing for sure it had charcoal filtration and stuff like that.
There's one thing that I didn't think about until a number of years ago. I take the water off the condensation of my air conditioner and put it on a tree. Consequently, that tree is shot up.
Absolutely.
It's more water than what you think.
I use the water from my air conditioner, the condensation from I use that water to water my cats. I put a bowl under it so that the cats have a constant source of water, because I'm running that AC. I am. So another thing to do. So you're using the gray water, all of that. This is where the leaching comes into mind. Okay. Because you're only going to be watering every once in a while. But remember how we were talking today about double watering, right? You water the first time and you're coming back and watering again so that the soil expands in your container. And so leaching is only really an issue in raised beds and in containers, because you want that water. When you water and the water evaporates, right, you still have salts left behind. Okay. And so over time, every time you water, that builds up if you have a decent amount of sodium in your system. Okay. And you can tell that you'll even get a white film that comes up on the top of that. Now, if you're seeing that white film, you need to leach.
Calcium.
Right. Well, or salt. That white film.
Well, it's calcium for us.
Okay, so, but what you need to do with your containers, regardless of whatever it is, because a plant doesn't need all of that. You need to use, and it's going to be about every 4 to 6 months, you're going to want to leach that. And what that means by leaching is to give it basically twice the volume of water for the pot. So like if you've got a 1 gallon pot, that's 2 gallons of water that you're running through there. Okay. And you
wash some of that out.
Yeah, and the purpose of that is to wash that salt out of the pot. Okay. So that's what leaching is. It's 2 times the volume of the pot. I don't even want to think about, I didn't do the calculation for the volume of 3.5 cubic feet of soil. Like, what is that in gallons? I don't even want to think about the gallon size of that lick tub. But so that's just something else to think about in a drought, is when you can, making sure that the other thing you don't want to do is have a catch pan underneath for your irrigation water. It would be great if that was rainwater and it was catching under there, but if it's irrigation water from our home systems, if you've got that catch pan in there, it's just soaking that water and chlorine. The chlorine evaporates, but it's just soaking up that sodium under there.
So you're saying the little wick tub that I have, the little spout, would not be good for me to catch that water and use it again.
Right. It depends, because y'all have a chlorine issue. If you let it, if it evaporates, then it's not a problem. Yeah. So I don't think it's a problem as long as you don't have a sodium problem.
I could
If
test
you
it-
don't have a
We don't
sodium
have
problem,
sodium.
yeah, if you don't have a sodium problem, that's an excellent thing to do with it.
So let me ask you.
Mhm.
Water's real hard, water's real soft. We can't get the soap off of out of our water
Mm-hmm.
system, so it's extremely soft. What does that mean for my plants versus?
Well, it
hard?
depends on what is making it that way. It depends on what mineral is present that's making that. You should send your water off to be tested, because otherwise we're just
It's-
guessing.
Public knowledge. We can find out, it's
Yeah.
public knowledge.
Okay.
So,
But I just.
although I
we're
will
talking
say
about
on
water
those,
today.
yeah, on those public test results, they don't, if I was having an issue at my house, I would not necessarily go by the public testing
Volunteers
results.
out of your
I would
process.
send it myself.
Uh,
Yeah,
They
And
have
so-
got A place.
Mhm,
that
yeah,
can,
yeah,
or
there is.
SFA.
yeah, SFA does do lab testing, or they did, and so does the A&M lab. The A&M lab does for sure. And the way that you do that, I mean, this is a good time to talk about that, is any container will do a plastic water bottle. I could use this. I drink what's in here and I go to the source that I want to test. If this was your irrigation, I would turn on the water hose or whatever you have, and you're gonna let that run for a minute so that you're not catching that first water out of there. Let it run for a minute, fill up the thing, rinse the thing, dump it out, fill up the thing, dump it out, and then fill up the thing and cap it and send it off. So that you get a clear view of what's in there.
I wonder if the water analysis would be different from container to container,
Not
one of them
generally.
blueberries, one of them blackberries, one of them.
It would, if you in general are using all the same soil and all of this, Oh, yeah. but I'm trying to answer that. Right. If you're in general using all the same soil media, if it's all the same media and all the same water and all the same fertilization, the water coming out is gonna be basically the same.
Okay.
The blueberries will
Well,
be a
then
little
we
bit
will.
different because they should have some different fertilization.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense?
Yes.
All right, so
Yes.
the next thing that you need to do is think about what you want to save. Okay, because when we go, the further we go into a drought situation, just like John was saying, at some point you go, okay, that's it for this. I'm not wasting any more water.
More time.
Yeah, I'm not wasting any more time or water on this. Yeah, Patty says the A&M Soil Lab was a really quick turnaround for her, and she had results. They received it on Wednesday. She had results by Friday. Cost anywhere from $25 to $75 depending on where you're testing. Okay, so is it actively producing? Are you using it? Is it worth the cost of the water and that's, so if it's just your lawn, no, okay. That's because you go, okay, when you go into a drought situation, is what I'm doing, what I'm watering here worth taking potentially drinking water away from someone else? Do I need it to live? How much can I give it to just keep it alive versus, so you can water, a tree. Trees are so important for this, especially if it's around your house where if something goes wrong with it, pieces of it can fall on your house. It's really important to keep your trees around your house living, okay? You need to, if we go 4 weeks without water, you need to water your perennial, those woody perennials, your trees, your roses, stuff like that. They can go without water.
Chestnut trees.
Yeah, so you definitely don't want to forget about those things. It's really important. But that's where you go, okay, I can keep it alive. I'm watering them just enough to keep it alive. Okay? Because as we go into further drought, even their big long roots aren't going to help. So once every 4 weeks, a little something, and you're going to do it around the drip zone, of the tree. But again, we're not trying to keep everything healthy and that they're gonna drop all their leaves and all of that. We just are trying to keep it alive in the long run, especially your fruit trees, you know, all of that stuff, that long-term, you're trying to keep it alive, not thriving, not keeping leaves on it, not, you just want it to live through the drought. That's hard for sometimes people to really wrap their mind around, is that they think I just really need to, if the leaves are falling. Yes, it's putting them into stress. And frequently after we have a drought summer, when we get those fall rains, the first fall rain, you'll actually, your trees will bloom, which is hard to see because that means the fruit crop the next spring automatically reduced in half, assuming we don't.
So could I have prevented that by having some water,
You-
some water scheduled in a drought?
Possibly. Usually the droughts also accompany record temps. So yes, potentially, by keeping it from going into such extreme drought conditions, you absolutely can prevent that.
If we go a couple more weeks, I expect a lot of my trees to start dropping
Mhm.
dropping
Dropping
leaves.
leaves, yeah.
Because that's
So
the first thing that happens to my cottonwood
four
trees.
4 weeks without water, and you need to really give them a little drink.
Okay.
All right, so let's moving on, talking about rainwater harvesting. Here in the room, how many of you guys have you have rainwater harvesting? Do you have some set up yet? You guys do? Okay, so that's really good. Patty, I don't know if you do yet or not. I think Robert and Jean do, but if you don't, you definitely should consider it, okay? There are no minimum treatment requirements for water for a single household. The only treatment requirements come up when it's supposed to be public, when it's going into public. Okay, so you can set up water catchment without TCEQ getting in your business, okay? So they're good and they're wonderful at doing what they do, and sometimes they're really necessary. But sometimes people also are concerned about, you know, is this gonna trigger them checking on me or whatever, and they, you know, in general, no. Okay, you do not have to have gutters. The pictures on this each show different ways of getting rainfall catchment in a situation without a roof or gutters. There are rain saucers. I love that bottom picture where it's got 4 rain saucers piped into a thing that will catch evaporate, you know, that catches condensation, dew points, everything, and it's going into that. Now, the wooden picture, they call that a butterfly design because of the wings. It sort of looks like it has wings. Those are basically pieces of wood or some sort of thing like that with a, you know, a metal rod or some sort of, you could even do it maybe with bamboo or something, but it have to fit just right. Down the center of that to take the water toward the barrel. And then at the top, that is literally just a blue tarp weighted down in the one area so that it will go into the container, and the containers are stair-stepped in size. You know, so those are all options. The considerations you need to take in mind for that is like the tarp is the fastest, easiest way to do that. You're going to need to have UV. That's going to need to have tarps that are set up for particular UV ray levels. Otherwise, it'll just disintegrate after summer, which maybe you only need it for summer. You know, I don't know. But that's something to consider that way. Also dealing with mosquitoes in your rainwater catchment, you know, screening it and that sort of thing. But why it's important, even if you only have 100 square feet of roof space, a 10 by 10 tarp, if we have 1 inch of rain, that is 62 gallons of water right there. A 10 by 10 tarp, you know, okay. If it's a 40 by 20 surface, that's a rooftop or whatever, 40 feet by 20 feet, that's 800 square feet, which is almost 500 gallons of water from a 1 inch of rain. Imagine if we get 2 inches or whatever, if it doesn't tear down your rainwater catchment. If we get it all in 30 minutes and it tears everything apart.
Which you can't hear.
But there's lots, like, just don't be like, okay, well, we can't do that because we don't have gutters and I don't have the money to put in a gutter right now. You know, that's where there are lots of things that you could do to help with rainwater catchment. And even if it's just one bowl that the animals can drink out of, or that you could use for emergency wash water or something, we should be doing rainwater harvesting if at all possible. I do not have a full system set up at my house, but I highly, highly recommend that, just because, you know, I learned in February of 2021 where the real weaknesses were in my survival system, which anybody with kids of any sort, we should have, like, okay, it's a hurricane. How are we going to live for 3 days or 10 days or whatever? You know, how do I fix that? And number one was, I need to be able to cook something. And number two is, I need water, you know? So that's important thing to think about. There's so much information available on the web about this. Texas A&M has a rainwater harvesting website, and we'll go through, it's probably the very next slide, where it talks about, I'll tell you what these things are. So this first link is the link to, and of course for you guys here in the room, these links aren't live, but you have that here. The second link is talking about basic water conservation tips, which I did not go into here, but I touched on them, but I didn't go into lots of them. An efficient use of water in the garden and landscape, which again, it's just like you might read through it and go, hey, I didn't think about that. There's a whole rainwater harvesting website, which is rainwaterharvesting.tamu.edu. And this last one, that last file that's on here in the room, you guys have a copy of this booklet. It's a TCEQ booklet that talks about use of, you know, recommended methods for, you know, harvesting, storing, and treating rainwater. It's a 52-page booklet.
Wow.
So I printed that out for those folks that came in here, but just something to look at, to consider. There may be information here you haven't thought about, how to do first flush diverters. And that's the whole, you know, the whole thing about that is just so you can divert that bird poop, you know, with that first flush that comes off the roof is going to have the bird poop and the dirt and all that. So, you know, how to deal with that. So there's some really good information in that booklet. And so I made that available to you guys. Now, this is where y'all get to ask me the questions. So what you got? Any more questions for me, or did we get them on through? Yes, sir.
I think rainwater's right at 7 here. Is that
The pH? Oh, it's
5 to 7?
yeah.
Okay.
It's not, the pH of that is not really an issue.
And the pH in my pond, even though it's the same rainwater, because of the runoff and the acid.
And the soil, the actual soil.
Acid from the soil,
Mhm.
predominantly pine trees, it's a little bit different. So if I wanted to use that, it may be a little
Yeah.
more acidic than the
Mhm.
water that I've been using from rainwater off
Yeah.
my roof.
Yeah, and so there are, depending on how acidic it was, there might be treatments that you could put in there if it was a real issue. I know that it depends how deep you dug to dig your pond. Did you dig your pond, or is it natural?
No, it was done.
Yeah, so that's the same thing that happened to some other people that I know, is those sublevels, those subsoil levels are really acidic in some of our areas. And so you end up with really some acidic pond water situations.
when I first got the pond, it was clear.
Mhm.
No aquatic plants were growing because it was so acidic.
Yeah.
I dumped a dump truck load of alkaline, agricultural alkaline in it,
Uh-huh.
and I got grass everywhere. I mean, everything from lily pads are growing out of it, so it fixed it. But
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's eroding slowly back toward the city.
In
Right.
use of the pond water, though, you may have to use a little more.
That's true. That's
So-
why I was saying, I know it's gonna be a
Lime.
little more acidic than just the rainwater.
Right. So,
And I bought a transfer pump to do that. So I can shoot it up the hill.
so there you go. So Patty, there are copies of that. There's still about 2 copies of that here. But if you can't access it from the link, were you able to download the PDF? Did you try to do that? Anyway, so there is a copy of the book here, and there's a copy of the PDF from what we talked about. So you're welcome to get those from the office. I do not have a survey today. I didn't do a survey for this one. So,
Maybe at the next club meeting, we could.
oh, I'm not, it's okay. I'll let y'all get away without it this time. Y'all need a break.
Yeah.
Live or die. Okay, hopefully we're letting me live today.
Great.
Okay. Okay, all right, that sounds good. So it'll be here. Just let me know when you want to swing by and get it. I'll just make sure it's here for you. So we'll save them for you. Anyway, so let me see what you're welcome. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to you guys. Let me go back here. Okay, so thanks for you guys for being online with me. I really appreciate it. It's always good to have friendly faces around, and for you guys here in the room, thanks for putting up with me here locally. I'm sorry there were no snacks, but anyway, so I hope you guys all have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting and say bye. Just, oh, thank you so much, Patty. Yes, I have to drive to Overton tomorrow. Yay. We're meeting yes, it's our new, the new person over extension statewide, our new extension director. So it's like the new boss's boss. I know. I don't even want to drive down there. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and end and say goodnight to all you guys.